Yep.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our workshop titled The Basics of Long-Term Care Planning. This is a part of our Money Matters series here at the Champaign Public Library. I'm Eva Liu, a reference librarian at the library. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Moving to a couple of Zoom features that might help you during this webinar. There are some icons at the bottom of your Zoom screen, depending on your device. At the far left, you have the option to control your sound and speaker. Moving to the right and toward to the center of the window, there is a chat and raise hand option. We invite you to type your question to the chat or click raise hand button if you prefer to speak and ask your question. Finally, I would like to introduce our presenter for the evening, Adrienne Olson, an investment advisor at Cozad Asset Management. Adrienne provides financial planning and investment management services for a variety of clients. Prior to joining Cozad in 2019, she worked in the financial planning industry for 11 years. Most recent as a certified financial planner practitioner. So Adrienne, thank you for being with us again. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, bear with me for a moment while I share my screen. Okay, Eva, does that look good?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, before we launch in, thank you, Eva, just for that introduction. Again, I'm Adrienne Olson. I'm a certified financial planner at Cozad Asset Management here in Champaign. You may have heard the Cozad name before. We actually just had a rather important anniversary celebration this summer. We hit 50 years in Champaign, so that's a great accomplishment. In our office, I'm one of about 20 credentialed advisors. So almost all of us have a CFP designation or CPAs. So I really enjoy that environment because we have a really smart, strong, knowledgeable team there. And we collaborate a lot together for the good of our clients. And I just really enjoy being there. So I also want to thank the Champaign Public Library just for inviting us to be a part of this series. I think financial education is really important. And so I'm happy to be here and be a part of the Money Matters series to just share with you all. As Eva said this evening, if you have questions as we're going along, go ahead and type it in the chat. And just because of our format, if people have questions at the end, I'll address them at the end. So go ahead and type them as they occur to you and I'll deal with them later. So just a little bit more about me. I'm an Urbana native, but I've also lived in Champaign and now Mahomet. So I very much enjoy being a part of the CU community. As you can see there, I'm a certified financial planner. I just want to take a moment and explain that because sometimes you see letters after somebody's name and might not know what they mean. Anyone can basically hang out a shingle that says financial advisor. And that's why credentials are important. So for more than 30 years, the Certified Financial Planner designation has been the certification that financial advisors look to just to show excellence in their field. If you see someone who's a CFP, that means we've gone through extensive training and experience requirements, and we commit to an ethical standard rule. In fact, we are obligated to work in our clients' best interest. So I think that's pretty important. Also, Cozad Asset Management is a firm. We are a registered investment advisory firm, which also means that we are obligated to work in the best interest of our clients. So I think it's good for us. It's a great reminder why we're there. And I think for our clients, it really gives people peace of mind that the advice that they're getting is not based on sales or commissions. We are there truly to do what's in the best interest of our client. So what brings you here today? Obviously, long-term care is on your mind. And I can tell you with my advisor hat on why I think that long-term care is an important issue. But my first experience with long-term care really was as a granddaughter. And I want to just share a little bit about that. When I was in high school, I watched my parents as they cared for my grandmother who had a health event that left her unable to do things on her own. So she was cared for in their home by my grandfather for a while, and then he had his own health issues. And after his death, she ended up moving into sort of a group home with people with issues like hers. And so she was able to get in care for a while in a home-like facility. Eventually she moved to an assisted living facility in town. And then as her situation changed and over time, she really needed some skilled care and ended up in nursing home care. So that was one grandmother's story. Then the other one, a few years later, had been living a couple of hours away from my parents. And, you know, when she decided to move a little closer to us to a condo, and she sort of became neighbors with my mom and dad. And before too long, they realized, I think like many people do when they get closer to an aged parent, that maybe their dementia and memory issues, you start to see those happen. And so she ended up living with them for a while. Eventually, she ended up in an assisted living facility, which she enjoyed a lot, but eventually her dementia progressed to the point that she needed some memory care as well. On my husband's side of the family, my in-laws have been fabulous caretakers of parents. My mother-in-law actually retired early to take care of her in-laws. They ended up building a house that could take care of or help take care of my husband's grandparents. So, you know, things like room for a wheelchair, things on one floor, just to try to make their house more usable for older people. But even eventually, still in their cases, their medical conditions progressed to the point that they also needed some facility care. So when I think about and talk about long-term care, it's very much a personal thing, because I've seen just in my own family how thinking through those issues are not just an issue for the person that needs care, but it really impacts entire families. In working with clients, I've also seen people who we had worked with years ago and written long-term care policies when they were, you know, maybe around retirement age, and now their age has progressed and health has changed. And some of those same people who had become insured years ago got coverage in place, and their health has declined. And some of those people now are using their coverage or are very glad they have it. Benefits were purchased then that probably aren't available today, just in terms of the generous things that they offer. So methods of care change, health changes, types of policies available change. So it's a very dynamic thing. But I do think that just thinking through the long-term care issue early helps whole families as they look to the future. So maybe you are here today because you're exploring options for your own future. If we were in a big group situation, I would be asking you what brings you here today, because I'd love to hear the different answers, but I'm sure there are quite a few different situations, as everyone's situation is unique. It's a pretty broad topic, but I started in the financial planning industry in 1999, and it's been really interesting, again, with my financial advisor hat on, just to see how the industry has changed through the years. In most client meetings, we are talking about long-term care issues and how that impacts entire family situations and asset situations. Policy styles, again, have changed. Policies have gotten more expensive over time and hard to get. I think when the long-term care industry started, there was maybe some mispricing that happened. Things were a little cheaper, and maybe they underestimated how long people might need care or what it might cost. So policies have changed. Also, policies have changed in some ways for the better, to be more flexible and give people more options. We've also just seen clients receive care and benefits when they needed it, and the peace of mind that that can bring, and also just how it really can preserve assets for the long term for people instead of having to be spent down. So I know no one really wants to think about a time when they might need long-term care. So planning ahead for this possibility often can get put off. A lot of people are sort of forced to think about it when they need care or a loved one needs care, but really that can leave people short on options and maybe not able to get the type of care or be able to afford what they want. So I think being here today for you is a great first step in planning for your future or the future of someone that you're caring about. So I just want to point out, you'll see some of my slides here this evening are from a company called One America. I want to credit them just with providing some of these basic slides with long-term care information that I'm going to share with you. I'm not going to get product specific on anything. This is more high view long-term care, but they did provide some good slides, so that's great. I also want to give credit to a company called Reg Ed, who's an education provider for advisors. I recently did an 8-hour long-term care refresher class, so some of the statistics and information I'm going to be sharing are from Reg Ed. Don't worry, I'm not going to share about long-term care for 8 hours with you this evening, but I think just the fact that a course for advisors is 8 hours long, talking about the depth of long-term care just goes to show that there's really a lot to talk about in this. So again, at the end, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. So if I don't take time on something you want to hear about, just let me know. So as this little slide here says, you are only one choice away from changing your life and the lives of those you love. And that may be true as you think about long-term care and how you want to deal with that issue. So what is long-term care? As it may already be apparent, long-term care is not a single type of care. Instead, it's sort of a continuum of care that covers a wide range of service and providers. So long-term care, in the way most people think about it, is often referred to as custodial care, long-term care, or extended health care. This may be what comes to mind first when you're thinking long-term care. And there are really 4 settings where long-term care happens. One is nursing homes. One is alternate care facilities like assisted living. Community-based professional care facilities, maybe like adult daycare, and at home. And I think it's pretty important to point out, especially these days, that long-term care is not necessarily nursing home care. A lot of care happens at home. In fact, most people prefer to be cared for at home if they are given the option. And who needs long-term care? Individuals need long-term care when they are facing a chronic condition or a trauma or illness that really limits their ability to carry out just basic things that we need to do in everyday life. You'll often hear them in the long-term care industry referred to as ADLs. That stands for activities of daily living. So one trigger often when someone is going to qualify for getting benefits from a policy is that they cannot do 2 or more of these things. So those are bathing, eating, dressing, transferring, toileting, and continence. So those are, again, the ADLs. The other trigger is severe cognitive impairment. So we're talking about things like dementia or Alzheimer's, which prevent someone from taking care of themselves on their own. The interesting thing about long-term care is it really involves the most intimate aspects of people's lives. I mean, we're talking about what you eat and when you eat, your personal hygiene, getting dressed, going to the bathroom. Sometimes it can involve things that are less intense, like just household tasks like preparing meals or using the phone, but it is a very personal type of care. I think another important differentiator with long-term care is the goal of it is not to cure an illness. So it's not like medical insurance, if you're talking about long-term care insurance, where you're paying to cure a condition. Long-term care isn't geared to cure an illness, but to give an individual an optimal level of functioning. Long-term care includes a variety of medical, social, personal, supportive, and specialized services needed by those who've lost some capacity for self-care because of a chronic illness or a disabling condition. So this isn't something that you're hoping to, in most cases, get past. It's a long-term condition. So I'll ask the question for you to think about. Don't have a good way for you to answer, but do you know what age demographic in our country is growing the fastest? So the fastest growing demographic is the oldest old, which is those 85 plus, and also those that are hitting the 100-year mark and living beyond that. So although the successful aging of our population is a significant success for mankind, it also poses some challenges for us as we extend the duration of life. It poses social challenges, political challenges, economic challenges, as we as a society need to address how we're going to address the needs of an older and frailer population. So you may be thinking, okay, so if someone needs long-term care, what on earth is that going to cost? Well, I have a great resource that you can go out to. Genworth is a company that is in the long-term care business. They do something every year called the Genworth Cost of Care Study. It's pretty fascinating. So you can go out to their website and they do a cost of care survey. So here's what they say. The world's population is aging at a faster rate than ever before, and people are living longer. Every day until 2030, 10,000 baby boomers will turn 65, and 7 out of 10 people will require long-term care in their lifetime. So that's a lot. That's, the majority of people are going to need some form of long-term care. So what they have found is that the cost of care can really vary. What does Champaign County do versus the rest of the country? So the really cool thing is we can actually see through this survey that they've done what the average cost of care is nationally, as well as I ran a report here to just show us what it is in the Champaign area. So this is from 2021. So these are pretty fresh numbers that we're looking at. So you can see in those gray boxes across the top there, there's a statistic for in-home care, for community and assisted living, and also a nursing home facility. So the top row is the national median cost, and the bottom is the monthly median cost for the Champaign area. So for example, a semi-private room in a nursing home facility, nationally, the average is $7,908 a month. So the good news is for us Champaign County residents, a semi-private room in a Champaign County nursing home last year was $6,083. So kind of a significant savings from the national number. Interestingly, we have some really good choices for assisted living facilities here in Champaign County. The average cost for an assisted living facility is slightly higher than the median nationally at $47.50 a month. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And a home health aid for both, you're looking in the neighborhood of $5,000 to $5,200 a month. So I think it's good as we think about long-term care and what it might cost. The least expensive option is, it's interesting. Assisted living and home care are sort of hand in hand. And then when you get into the facility where you're needing round the clock nursing care, things like that, it gets more expensive. So facts and figures, I want to just show you some averages for how long care happens on average. So these statistics are built on studies from some different long-term care insurers. So these are based on claims information. So we're going to look at some average numbers. It's important to understand with averages that they don't always tell the whole story, and no person is the exact average. So if you only plan for the average, that may not be enough. But I think it's instructive for us just to get a feeling for what it might be. So we have this little phrase at our house that we use, that a statistic might be completely true but it might not be truly complete. So I think that's kind of the case with these. They're true, but it maybe doesn't tell the whole story. That said, the average length that these insurance companies have found on their claims, the average length of long-term care needed for men is 2.2 years. However, once someone needs care, they find that they tend to stay longer. So once a man starts to receive care, that actually the statistic increases to 3.9 years. So you're looking at just under 4 years for the average long-term care claim for a man. As for women, you've probably heard the statistic that women tend to outlive men. The average length of long-term care is 3.7 years. However, once again, that average increases after the first year of care. And in this case, it goes up to 5.2 years. Lastly, I think one of the most important statistics on long-term care may be the average length of a long-term care event for someone who's diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and that is 8 years. And that's just the average Alzheimer's claims. You're going to have people shorter, but also people longer there. And I think part of that is, you know, people with Alzheimer's, if you know or love someone who's had Alzheimer's, their mind may not work the way it used to, but the rest of their body may be healthy. And so I think that's one differentiator there. Let's see, this is just kind of interesting, but these are the largest claims that some of these companies dealt with, and each of them exceeded $1 million. So planning, had they only planned for the average, they would have not had sufficient coverage. So just trying to think through, as you think through benefits, if you're considering a long-term care policy, I think looking toward a lifetime benefit policy is important if it's something that you can afford, because planning for the average in a lot of cases is not going to be long enough. So here are just a few other facts, figures, and questions for consideration. You know, as our population grows, the demand for long-term care services are probably only going to increase in the future. And, you know, we know from basic economics that higher demand often leads to higher costs. So it's very possible that long-term care services are going to continue to cost more in the future. I think we all know the inflation word right now. That's something we're all very familiar with. Well, the long-term care industry has a lot of inflationary pressure behind it as well. Longer lifespans, advances in medical technology are helping us live longer, but access to new technology also comes with increased costs to use it. Family dynamics, again, as I mentioned from my story at the beginning, I think who is providing care now is a really important discussion to have. Most parents don't want their children putting their lives on hold to provide care. Their children may not be the people best suited to provide the care. And even if they did and they have multiple kids, how are you going to spread responsibility across children? There are just a lot of discussions to be had in terms of family dynamics when you're talking about care. And then the government, what programs will be available and who will qualify? Who knows how those things will change in the future? So just quickly, I'll touch on this. I think it's interesting. You know, we've mentioned Alzheimer's and dementia. Alzheimer's is a degenerative disease that impacts memory and other mental functions. There's no cure, and that disease really does often require long-term care services, and it can be for an extensive amount of time. So right now, 27.6 people in the 27.6% of people between 65 and 74 have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And no surprise, as the age span gets longer, almost a third of people 85 plus have dementia or Alzheimer's. So there were an estimated 6.2 million Americans aged 65 plus with Alzheimer's in 2021. And as we look to the future, that's expected, not surprisingly, to grow as the baby boomer generation grows to 12.7 million. So new treatments for common ailments like heart attack and high blood pressure are discovered in helping people live longer. But since there are few treatments and no cure yet for Alzheimer's, people, when they have it and they live longer, can make preparing for retirement kind of difficult. So 70% is the statistic. An American turning 65 today has an almost 70% chance of requiring long-term care services in their lifetimes. And of those needing care, 20% of those will need it for longer than 5 years. So that's just important to keep in mind. We all hope it's not us, but statistically, it's going to be quite a few of us. So you may not need care, but if you do, how will it affect your family? I think this is an important conversations to have. Just to think ahead, here's some important impact on spouses. Depression is increased. Often I find this interesting that depression is higher in the spousal caregiver than it is for the person receiving care. Often caregivers, especially those that are dealing with people with memory care, feel like they're having to adjust to take care of an entirely different person. They can go through mourning their previous life. They can face some physical challenges. Emotional strain can have a lot of stress, excess stress in caregivers. It can just lead to all sorts of things: poor sleep, increased blood pressure, a host of just stress-related illness. Trouble physically helping due to size. So I can relate to this. My husband had to have some abdominal surgery about a month ago, and he's a lot bigger than me. And it was eye-opening how hard it was for me to help him move off the couch or move when he needed to. And I can only imagine fast forwarding our lives 30 years to see how I could help him if I needed to. So mobility challenges can be an issue. And even then, if you don't have a huge size differential, if both people are frail, they can have a hard time helping each other. So that's something to consider. Also, just the financial impact, the potential decline in retirement assets due to paying for a spouse's care. So it really does affect both or the whole family. And if people are spending more on long-term care bills, there just is less money left in the budget to spend on other things. Also, when you think about adult children and how long-term care for someone can affect adult children, again, we've got emotional impact. Caregivers can suffer from increased depression and stress. Some 36% of caregivers report high emotional stress. They can also describe feeling frustrated, angry, drained, guilty, or helpless as a result of being the person to provide care. 48% of caregivers feel like they had no choice in providing care, and as a result feel a high amount of emotional stress. I think it's really interesting. People that are caring for a relative report a lot greater feeling of stress than people that are caring for a non-relative. So I think there's that added burden of caring for someone that you love. They too can suffer some physical issues if they're not able to take care of themselves because they're taking on the burden of taking care of somebody they love. Lower levels of self-care. And again, it can bring strain on their own marriage and financial losses due to potentially putting a career on hold. 61% of working caregivers suffer work-related impacts due to trying to play those dual roles. So it's worth mentioning. And also less time raising their own children. I know I've heard my parents refer to this as the sandwich generation, where you're in the middle of caring for your parents, but you're also raising your own children. So when I was a teenager, my parents were taking care of their aging parents and teenagers. And now that I'm parenting teenagers, I can really appreciate how difficult that must have been. And potential impact on siblings. I think that if care is given, you really need a model of how to work together. Some families can work it out well and other families struggle. You can have siblings that have different ideas about what a parent might need. And, the person who's next door may feel like they have to take on more of the burden than the sibling that might be far away. tension and resentment. You can get into having people argue over caregiving. One thing that I've seen sort of warned about, and have seen this happen as well, is maybe you've got a sibling that doesn't have a job or needs a place to stay, and they think, well, I'll just move in with mom and dad and take care of them. But that in and of itself can be a recipe for trouble. If that happens, it's really recommended that needs and expectations are spelled out pretty clearly to avoid fighting, and also to make sure that the person receiving care is really getting the level of care that they need. And also impacts on friends, especially if you're single and don't have family nearby. You really need to have a plan. Who will be designated to care for you, and are they ready to accept that responsibility? Are they able themselves, financially and physically, to care for you? And who will look out for you financially, making sure your bills are paid, and your mail is getting opened, all those things. That plans are available to help with bill administration. And I think importantly for everybody, no matter what situation you're in, the question of if your legal documents are up to date. This is really important. We talk to pretty much every client about it every time they're in for a review, that they need to be making sure that their wills, trusts, powers of attorney for property or healthcare, whatever your attorney advises, are current, and that they reflect your current wishes. It's easy to get something put in place at some point and just sort of forget about it, but it's important to know and review every once in a while to make sure that your legal documents really reflect your current wishes. So if you do need care, how will you pay for it? So let's just review 3 of the major ways that long-term care gets paid for. Unfortunately, it is not free, as we've talked about looking at those Genworth numbers, and it can really be quite expensive. So here are sort of the major ways it's financed. One is, I think a lot of people think the government will pay via either Medicare or Medicaid. And this one can be kind of confusing because technically there is some nursing home care that Medicare pays for. However, it is only following a hospital stay, and it's only for a certain period of time. That care is also designated to be rehabilitative care, meaning you're getting better and coming back out. It's not long-term care. So say I had a knee or a hip replacement and I need to rehabilitate and then be able to take care of myself once again, and that's the expectation. That's the type of care that Medicare is going to cover when it comes to nursing facility care. The type of care that we're talking about today is different. The type of long-term care we're talking about today is, from this point forward, I'm not expected to get better from these conditions. I'm needing help with these activities of daily living that we talked about. So things like, the bathing, eating, getting dressed, using the restroom, those things. Medicaid does pay for this, but only if you have very limited income and resources. Besides, most of Medicaid is not going to pay at home. So it's going to require facility care, which is not most people's first choice for a whole lot of reasons. They want to be in their home where they can see their family and friends the way they want to and have choice in that. In Illinois, someone needs to meet their spend down monthly to even be Medicaid eligible every month. The medically needy asset limit is $2,000 for an individual and $3,000 per couple. There are a couple notable exceptions, like a home or a car, but for the most part, you really have to deplete most of your assets to qualify for Medicaid. So the second answer that we get is just traditional long-term care is something that can be a payer, and it is absolutely appropriate. I applaud anybody who has long-term care insurance in place. I'll talk about it just a little bit more in detail in a minute, but it can be expensive. So some people have just decided, maybe they got a quote at one point or whatever, decided it wasn't in their budget and haven't even looked. But traditional long-term care insurance is a payer for long-term care. And another way is just paying out of pocket. So self-funding, people saying, I don't know if I'm going to need it. If I do, I'm just going to pay it from my assets or my income. And that's how I'm going to fund it. So there's really no hard and fast rule as to the amount of assets somebody should have to be thinking about long-term care insurance. However, if an applicant has $30,000 or less, it's not likely that long-term care insurance is going to be a good choice for that person. The premiums are going to be too expensive probably. So you'll probably be looking at other sources of funding like Medicaid if you have to receive that type of care. On the other end of the spectrum, once somebody's hitting $1.5 million to $2 million, that's where you can start having that self-funding conversation. It may be that that client says, I want to preserve all these assets for my kids or for charity or for whatever. I feel like I have this. I'd rather, put that risk on an insurance company. So that's a choice too. But I would say, that's sort of the range of people that if they're thinking, okay, maybe a long-term care insurance policy might be a good choice for me. I would say, the bottom threshold is that sort of 30,000 and the top threshold when you're getting into $1.5 million, $2 million. But everybody's situation is unique. It's why you really need to have a good conversation with an advisor or an insurance professional that can think through options with you. Let's see. So some people think, oh, I've got plenty of assets. I'm going to be okay. And you may. But I think it's important to realize that paying for long-term care is not just a one-time payment. You don't write that check the day you need home care or go to a nursing home. It really becomes a monthly expense and a monthly line item in your budget. So I think you almost have to think of it as an ongoing bill that doesn't have an exact end date, because it's probably something you'll be caring for in some form for the rest of your life. So really just how do you generate the income that you will need? So long-term care is not really it really is an income problem, not an asset problem. And again, just one of the impacts of self-funding can be, even if you have the assets to do it, you may be forced to liquidate assets faster than you intended. I can tell you one thing that we talk to clients about a lot, especially retired clients as we're managing assets, is tell us how much cash you think you're going to need. Tell us how much cash you're going to think you need, because even as we manage people's investment portfolios, to do that well, we always have an eye on sort of buckets of how things are managed. So we want to make sure that money that's going to be needed sooner is going to be stable. So then when we hit things like a rocky market environment like we have this year, we know that we're not worried about where that money is coming from. So having to liquidate things more quickly does put a little more pressure just on the overall portfolio. A ripple effect into other planning. So like tax planning, you may be having to make distributions from investments. Say you're having to take more money out of your IRA, you're just looking at more taxable income. So the speed at which you're having to liquidate assets to pay for care, it's important and something to consider. Again, if you've got a spouse who's not needing care, but a larger percentage of the budget is having to go toward care expenses, you may be leaving a spouse with less available assets to pay for just ongoing expenses. And again, leaving children with little to no inheritance. And this is important to some people, and to some people it is not. So I think either way, it's just a consideration. And again, I talked about the taxes a little bit. So the good news is the government has recognized that long-term care is going to be a significant expense for a lot of people. And so they have done some things to create tax incentives through a few different tax laws through the years to help pay for care when it happens. So long-term care insurance premiums are deductible sort of in the same way that health insurance premiums are deductible. That is, for the average taxpayer, You probably aren't getting a deduction unless you have really high medical expenses or you're self-employed. So that's something you can talk to your tax preparer about. But in most cases, qualified long-term care policies, the benefits from those are received tax-free. So when you're receiving care, those benefits are going to be tax-free in most cases. And that's good news. So I just want to give you a quick thumbnail sketch of a traditional long-term care policy and what it might look like, what the benefits sort of are. There are some standard things to be a tax qualified long-term care insurance policy, some components that it has to have. So some of those will be the same, but sometimes things are built into a base policy and sometimes things are built in as optional riders. So again, if you're looking into long-term care insurance, this is something that your advisor or an insurance agent can really help you think through those items. But generally speaking, again, to receive benefits from a policy, the trigger is you're going to need to meet at least 2 of those ADLs, those activities of daily living that you need help with, or you're going to reach that level of cognitive impairment. But here are some of the features that are normally a part of a basic long-term care policy. So they're going to have benefits for confinement in a nursing home. Most are going to pay in an alternative care facility, like an assisted living facility. They may pay for community-based services. So this would be something like respite care. So this would be benefits. So someone could take care of you, say your children are taking care of you, but you need somebody to do that while they're not available. For hospice care, so that's end of life care, adult day care, and also paid home care. They also probably are going to have benefits for care advisory services. So maybe a coordinator that's helping do things with your facility. Bed reservation benefits. This is, so say you're in a nursing facility, but you need to go to the hospital for a little while. You know, there's a shortage of beds. And so this bed reservation benefit makes sure that you will have a place to go back to once you're released from the hospital. Waiver of premium benefits. So that means once you start receiving benefits on a long-term care policy, you stop actually having to pay your premium once the waiting period is up. And extended benefits in the event of a lapse while the insured is confined in a nursing home. Not surprisingly, some people might forget to pay their bill in that time when they're transitioning to a nursing home. It's kind of can be a little bit of a chaotic time. So making sure that that policy doesn't lapse. There are some optional rider things too that get built in. And again, this just depends on the policy you're looking at, but shared coverage benefits. So often this will happen between spouses, but it can happen between partners or even siblings that you can share coverage. So that's one way to spread benefits. Purchase option benefits. So this means maybe the right to increase your coverage in the future. Non-forfeiture benefits. Family care benefits. Say you have another family member that might need care. It might, your policy may have some flexibility to do that. Restoration of benefits. So you need some care, you have care, you're better for a while, but then you need some more care. It can restore those benefits. And return of premium benefits. But I think the most important one to touch on, that I'll touch on just a little bit in detail, is inflation coverage. Inflation coverage, again, as we know this year, inflation really does make a big impact over time. So let's imagine that you're applying for a policy that is going to cover $200 a day. It's going to cover lifetime benefits, either in a facility or at home after a 90-day waiting period. But you're concerned about inflation and realize that inflation protection is something that you need to consider, because that $200 a day may be great now, but is that really going to keep up with the cost of nursing coverage in 10 years or 20 years? It may not. So in fact, most policies, you if you choose not to do inflation coverage, you have to acknowledge that you are denying that. Now, one way to offset it is you can just choose a higher face amount up front, even choose something that maybe is more, or if you're pretty budget conscious and you think something is better than nothing, you might choose the level you could choose and maybe waive the inflation coverage. These are all variables you could deal with, but let's just look at that chart for a minute. So basically how simple coverage works is that increase is only going to be 5% off that initial daily benefit every year. So your daily benefit in year one is $200. In year two, it's only going to go up 5%, so $210. And then the next year when it gets calculated, it still gets the 5% increase only gets calculated off that initial year one face amount. So it's only going to go up by $10 a year indefinitely. So if you look at the end of year 10, that maximum, or you're at $290 a day for the daily benefit versus, let's see, if we get into compound inflation, I think you'll see the difference here. That daily benefit, again, we're starting at $200 a day. Year one, you don't notice the difference because it's 5% again on that initial daily benefit. But the next year, that 5%, instead of being off the initial 200, it is on the previous year's amount. So that 5% would be calculated on the 210, which makes the year three amount 221 instead of 220. So over time, that really does compound and make a difference. So at the end of year 10, we're looking at a $310 a day benefit versus, if I can go back, $290. So over time, it does make a difference. So that's sort of the thumbnail sketch of traditional long-term care insurance. There is a new style of policy, or newer, again, as things evolve over time, different types of options pop up. So there's a newer type of policy called asset-based long-term care, which has a component of life insurance with it, as well as an income stream that you can create for long-term care. So often what will happen here is you might reposition a part of your current investment portfolio into a policy. So they've got it here. They're carving out a part of your conservative part of your investment portfolio. And then it could be used to pay for long-term care for a lifetime. They show it here. So you sort of have a base policy that has a life insurance. You're paying premiums, but it's like a cash value life insurance policy. So on your day one of care, you sort of burn through that life insurance portion. And then once the life insurance death benefit is exhausted, then a rider kicks in and would pay long-term care payments. So this can get funded a variety of different ways. It can get funded like with a single cash premium up front, or it could be a fixed annual premium. There's a lot of flexibility. This is kind of a complicated product, but with the right advisor / agent, somebody could help you think through that if that seems like an appropriate style of policy. The benefit to this type of policy is if you don't use that long-term care insurance, when you die, eventually that's going to come back to your family as a life insurance benefit. Whereas with traditional long-term care insurance, if you don't use it, that money just goes away. So I have talked a lot tonight, but again, there's a lot to know in this area. So we've just sort of scratched the surface. Eva, as a follow-up next week, I think is going to send out a resource page that I've created for you, with just a whole lot of mostly government sites, but just all sorts of information on aging and where you can go for help for things with questions, and my contact information will also be in there. So I hope this information has been helpful. I'll get to the question in a minute, Eva. I'm not quite ready.
Okay.
But I want you to think about just what is a good next step for you. So I challenge you to just think about that and think about one idea of a way that you could move forward. I think one might be talking with your family about your wishes for long-term care in the event that that's needed, or maybe just even you really thinking through what you would prefer. Exploring options for care in your community. I had a client in last week that is in his mid-60s, and he had just gone out and done some research just to know what was out there. And I think that was great because we were able to have a good conversation about things that he might consider in the future. He's not ready yet, but he just wanted to know what was out there. Thinking through where you live, this is something we talk with clients about quite a bit. Is your home functional? I've heard that this is going to be a huge growth trend in the future as people age, but want to stay in their homes, for home contractors who can come in and make modifications for people as they age. So maybe widening your doorway so a wheelchair could fit through, or trying to do things like that. Just little adaptations, putting up grab bars in the shower to reduce the risk of falling, things like that. Maybe it's downsizing. Maybe it's saying, we want to move to a condo. I talked to some clients just last week that they had really been thinking they were going to have to move out of their home, and they were going to move somewhere bigger and flat. And then they realized, nope, we're going to be okay for a little while, but eventually we're going to go to a condo, but we're going to wait a couple of years and do that then. And that may be the right choice for them, but at least they've thought through it now. And I think, again, just if you feel like long-term care insurance is something you want to think a little bit more about, talking to an advisor or an agent might be a good fit for you in your situation. So I see a chat question here, so I'm going to address that question. We are in our 50s. We just got a quote for permanent life insurance with long-term care, $100,000 a month. The quote was almost $900 a month. Is that average? So I am assuming maybe that's for 2 people. Is that correct? I don't know if you can respond there or not. So you're talking a premium. I'm assuming that's probably for 2 people. So you're talking $10,800 a year. So yeah, I would say for permanent life insurance with long-term care, that's probably in the range. You're in your 50s. Yeah, I would look at some of the bells and whistles. I don't know if you were able to have a conversation about some of those things. But yeah, it's not out of the range of normal. I don't know if you got a quote from more than one company. I think sometimes that's interesting too, to get quotes from a couple different companies to do that. I know we work with a sort of a brokerage agency that can go out and get us quotes for clients, and they're typically close, but they're not identical. So it also depends. It is important, I didn't mention this, but to notice the quality of the company too that you're getting long-term care through, because you want to make sure that company is going to be around. So you don't always want the low-cost provider. So I'd say yes, not looking at the policy. I think you're in a range that's realistic though. So I just want to end with a little bit of good news. I was reading the Wall Street Journal yesterday, and it made me smile. Here I was sort of preparing for this presentation, but they were talking about innovations for aging around the world and some things that are happening. I thought these were kind of fun that I'd share with you to close. So one thing that they're finding is good. I think this is in Japan. They are having community grandparents, so not really flesh and blood grandparents, but having older adults go in and help in schools with younger kids. And they're finding that it's great for the older adult volunteers. They're enjoying spending time with the kids. It's bringing a bright spot to their day, but the kids are loving it too, because they're getting some just undivided attention from some older adults, and that's great for the kids. Similarly, they are finding that recruiting older teachers. So maybe people that are toward the end of their career, but have a whole wealth of information, are finding some meaning in going and teaching maybe for a couple years and sharing their knowledge. So doing that. Another neat idea out of Africa, grandmother counselors. So they've established this friendship bench where some of the older and wiser members of the community can go sit on the bench and talk to some of the younger adults in their community that might be struggling with mental health issues. Just having an older friend to talk to can do a lot of good. Self-help communities. I thought this was kind of neat. I think it was in Korea. There's a group of ladies that they sort of know what's needed and they take care of each other. You've sort of got a circle of care. And also just some neat urban planning with scientific solutions and initiatives for healthy living. So one idea was in places where there are a lot of retired people, they would adjust the crossing time for pedestrians at stoplights so they have more time to get across the street, or building, I saw somewhere they were giving tax incentives for playgrounds to be built next to assisted living facilities or even hospice facilities. So they had intergenerational playgrounds with the goal of having kids and older people mingle, finding that it was beneficial for all. So I am hopeful for the future as we think about all the scientific innovation that's happening, just all the different ways that we take care of each other as a society. So again, thanks, Eva, for the opportunity to present tonight. Again, I'm Adrienne Olson from Cozad. You can find me, you can find us through the website, and she'll be sending out more information later. Thanks for listening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Adrienne. That was great for this informative and helpful presentation. And thank you all of your attendance tonight. This will be our last Money Matters series for the year. Our next series is going to be on February 16th. So that it's going to be a budget-friendly travel presented by Mark Waters, a business professor at the University of Illinois. And he and his family are frequent travelers. So be sure to check library's online event calendar. And we hope to see you at the library. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.